the metaphor that occurred to me was turning buckshot into type, because a scanner, the art museum wanted a scan of the entire book, and they did it at what they think of as high resolution, which is about 300 dpi, which is good for photographs, for color work, etc. But for doing letterpress printing, it would be 1200 dpi. You need a much higher resolution, otherwise your eye can see what are known as jaggies. So I took this what I consider low quality scan in color, and in Photoshop managed to condense it down to a properly sized document and get the resolution up to where I needed to be, taking all the color out and fading out any light colors that were behind it. There were a lot of gray tones of color being put around the type that the type was printed over, etc., that I had to get out. So then it's a process of moderating these gray tones, because if you just tell all of the midtones to go away, your type is going to look horrible. It's going to look like it was gnawed on by a bunch of rats. And if you bring the midtones up too much, your type turns into little fat sausage fingers. It loses all of the serifs, all of the detail, all of the little lovely peculiarities that make individual typefaces unique. So it's a process of taking segments of type at a time. Some areas are better than other areas, some areas are worse than other areas. So you sort of have to take areas that are similar to each other and work on what they're saying. You can't do the whole thing all at once. I would take like maybe 10 lines at a time and work it up and work it down to move the histogram sliders such to take away the gray spots as far as I could before the type started to get looking too thin and too spindly, and then bringing up the darker grays as far as I could until the type started looking fat and out of focus. And then there's a process of going through with what in Photoshop are called from the old days dodge and burn tools of, well, I need to bring up some of the gray stuff in here, or I need to trim down some of the grays on the outside of this. In fact, every letter of this poem was gone over. I essentially traced out the type by hand and mouse finger. Some areas more intensely than other areas. Sometimes there were no counters in the east, it just looked like a blob. Well, as you stare at different typefaces, you gain what I call a sensitivity to the letter form. You sort of know where that letter wants to go, how that letter wants to look. You remember what previous instances of that letter look. And you start to get to see, oh, well, this can get shaved off a little here, that can get shaved off a little here, oh, this wants to slope a little bit like that. I would say a good 30% of the type I wound up tweaking at that level of detail. I spent, I don't remember, what was it, 4 or 5 weeks on the digital document, and it's a situation of the more you see, the more you see. So you go over it once and say, okay, it's looking good now. And then you go back over and look over it again. And it's like, well, I can fuss with this. I could probably spend another month in the digital document refining that type even further and further and further, because one of the wonderful things about printing is it's absolutely endless.